Hello, I am Ryan DeCorpo, co-coordinator of Pax Christi New York State and a member of the 50th Anniversary Planning Committee alongside my colleague, former National Council Chair and Ambassador of Peace, Isaac Chandler. We are joined by Bill Quigley, the 2003 recipient of Pax Christi's Teacher of Peace Award. A public interest attorney since 1977 and former 15-year general counsel to the American Civil Liberties Union in Louisiana. He served for 3 decades as director of the Stuart H. Smith Law Clinic and Center for Social Justice and the Gillis Long Poverty Law Center at Loyola University, New Orleans. In a distinguished career centered on civil rights and social justice issues, he has advised Amnesty International USA, Human Rights Watch USA, and provided legal representation to Elizabeth McAllister, Sister Megan Rice, and Jesuit Father Daniel Berrigan. In 2006, Bill received the Stanford Law School National Public Service Award, among various other career accolades. Currently, he is an emeritus law professor at Loyola, New Orleans. Bill, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. It's a very generous introduction. I appreciate it.
All right. Well, I guess I'll start with the first question. So, Mr. Quigley, how did you first become involved with Pax Christi USA?
So, I don't actually remember when I first started. It was just a part of the social justice community in New Orleans and nationally and internationally. And we had a very strong local community in New Orleans through Doug Duson and a number of other people. And they were very much leaders on peace issues and social justice issues. So I became involved with them probably in the 1980s, maybe even in the 1970s, and was aware clearly of Pax Christi's work, took a lot of inspiration, continued to take inspiration from the people involved and the staff, the board. I've got to become friends with a number of people there. So it's really through the people. It's not so much, wasn't an intellectual encounter. It was more with the people involved and then from them involved in the social justice, and learned quite a bit and continue to learn quite a bit.
In a 2020 webinar with the Loyola National Lawyers Guild, you said, quote, "As a great social justice radical lawyer, I'm not going to follow the rules." How has Catholic social teaching and your own ethical sense influence your practice of the law and the clients you've chosen to represent?
So I have been teaching law for 30 years and practicing for another 15 before that. And it became very clear to me that law is not the same as justice very early on. And the idea of the challenge for all of us, I think, is to narrow the gap between what the law is and what justice is. And I think historically, peace movements, human rights movements, civil rights movements, worker rights, labor unions, women's rights, disability, gay and lesbian, all the various groups have all tried to use the law where possible, but also to change the law to make it closer to the ideal of justice. And I've been helped on that journey a lot and really inspired by the opportunity to represent hundreds of people who have been arrested for acts of faith and justice, for civil disobedience actions. Catholic workers, members of the Plowshares movement, people at the School of America's Watch in Georgia, and people, across the country working on justice issues. And they are constantly helping me learn where law and current arrangements are maybe better than they used to be in some areas. We have made some progress in some of these areas, but there's still a huge gap between what the law says and what society has been able to accomplish in terms of how we govern ourselves and what's really right. And in my study of how social justice comes about, it seems to me that one of the pieces of bringing about social justice is challenging the law. And so whether you challenge it in court, or you challenge it at an army base, or you challenge it by marching when people say you can't march, or you take direct action against nuclear weapons, or direct action against for climate justice issues, against pipelines and things like that, that is part of the movement for social change. And an awful lot of the people that I have represented over the years have been involved with Pax Christi, and certainly faith-based people, plenty of people not faith-based as well, but faith-based social direct action is certainly a part of our history as a country, and part of the history of how social justice comes about. Certainly not the only part. I mean, it's very important to have educators and communicators and legislators and people who are comfortable with all that part, which is, a different thing. But to also just say, look, enough is enough. I have to stand up with others to try to point out the hypocrisy and the gap between law and justice. So I've really learned by that, and I found a lot of very, very courageous people who are willing to risk time in jail, in prison, and the like, in order to stand up for justice. And that's been a particular place where, as a lawyer, I can be helpful with that. Originally, 20 something years ago, I thought I would be called to take those actions myself and risk jail and prison and that. And the people that I was working with said, well, Bill, that's all good and that's nice, but we really need a lawyer to help us get out and to help us guide us through the legal system so that we have a chance to talk about the reasons that we're doing it. And so Catholic social justice is a terrific, it's a terrific set of guidelines and hopes and inspiration and thoughts about human dignity and collective justice that is a good way to measure where we should be, maybe as opposed to where we are. And honestly, I grew up Catholic, and I didn't really hear much about Catholic social justice until very, late in my time as a Catholic. And I was always sort of thought that Catholic rules were more about the difference in our bodies between our knees and our nose. That was very clear. Catholic sexuality and don't steal, etc. But in terms of our responsibility for social justice, our communities, our country, our world, I didn't really hear much about that. And it was once I was introduced to Catholic social justice and Catholic social teaching that really was part of the liberation of my understanding of what we could do. And Pax Christi, very, very important part of that. There's not a lot of institutions that are based on Catholic social justice teachings and are consistent partners in trying to spread the word about that. Over the years, there's been this and there's been that, but over the decades, Pax Christi has stayed there and continued to point not just to peace and disarmament and nuclear weapons issues and that, but what the full meaning of the word peace, which is, the various parts of justice, everything from environmental justice to worker justice to respect for people. And Pax Christi has been a great fount of information for me and support. And again, not as much intellectually as it is the actions of the people themselves who are involved. Because it's one thing for somebody to tell you about something. It's quite different for somebody to show you something and show you by their life. And that's where I've been so fortunate to be connected with a lot of those folks, including a lot of the Teachers for Peace and people that are being honored at this upcoming conference and many, many more.
So, Bill, would you say that your, can you narrow one specific event or one sort of aha moment which brought you into a lot of this peace and justice work? You've been doing this for so long. And of course, you mentioned your fascination with the law and making the law work for people and making the law just. But is there one specific sort of event where I guess it all kind of turned on for you and got you into peace and justice work, if you haven't already mentioned it?
I studied to be a Catholic priest, and I went to high school, a high school seminary. I got kicked out of that seminary because I had trouble following authority, and I asked too many questions. And I went to Catholic seminary college, and I got kicked out of that for various misbehaviors. And then I went to theology in New Orleans to Notre Dame Seminary. And it was once I got to Notre Dame Seminary that I realized the difference between religion and faith, religion and spirituality, religion and a life of searching and trying to embody the gospel values as much as we could. And at that time I was early 20s and I was pretty lost. And because I decided I couldn't be a priest. So everybody was actually right that I was not priestly material, but I was too hard-headed to realize that. And so I left the seminary, but I wasn't sure what to do. And I was fortunate that I was invited by some Catholic sisters who lived in a 1,500 unit apartment complex of low-income housing in New Orleans, invited to be a part of their community and to join with them in providing services to the neighborhood. And there was a community of Catholic nuns, former priests, people in the community in that who provided services, but also sort of lived in had something of a community, occasionally had community meals, had community prayer, reflection, that sort of thing. And I think it was at that time that I realized that being directly connected with people who are impacted by injustice was important. And I was really involved with hundreds of women and mothers and grandmothers who were trying to fight for better housing and the like. And the people in my community really were able to point out how housing is a human right, how housing is part of peace and justice, how housing, it's not just about eviction and security deposits and all that, it's really part of life. And I think at that point, started to see some of the connections between faith-based social justice, community accountability, listening to the directly impacted, and understanding how when people come together, we are so much more than just the addition of one to another, that we are a multiplier effect among others. And I think from that point on, I have been searching and learning and trying to figure out this intersection of faith and justice and human rights and community and the directly impacted. And that has taken me to public housing, communities. It's taken me to death row. It's taken me to Port-au-Prince. It's taken me to Iraq. It's taken me to New York, to, all kinds of things. But it's all the same in terms of these ingredients in our lives, which is listening to the voices of those who are directly impacted, studying and trying to learn the most that you can about what's possible, and then trying to share your talents with others, but to understand that it's not just I'm sharing my talents with others. I am doing that, but to understand that they're sharing their talents with me. And they, through their experiences and their wisdom and their inspiration and their determination to keep going when they don't have the education or the financial independence or the backing of institutions and stuff like that I've had, that you really can look at the gospel and social justice values in a radical way, radical meaning root way, you know, down to where, and if somebody of a judge or a newspaper or a person in the community says, well, you're just wrong about that. You can feel comfortable enough to say, well, I'm exploring that with people who don't think that's wrong, and that we can be engaged in this process of trying to live a fuller life, not just for ourselves, but with others in our community. So that's a really long answer, and maybe not the answer that everybody, you know, that would have thought of beforehand, but it's really to understand that this is all relationships. So in a sense, my best teachers, my original teachers, were the mothers and grandmothers in this public housing development who didn't have the education, money, anything that I had. And I thought I was going there to serve them. And I did. You know, I was able to contribute some things. But what I didn't understand was how much they were serving me, and how much they were educating me, and how much they were inspiring me. And that, I think, was the first beam of light that I had. And I wasn't totally even conscious of it at the time, that this idea of service and being for others is important, but only to get you to the point where you can listen and understand and be in relationship and love and respect the people who you think you're going to serve, because you are helping them, but they are helping you. And if you don't recognize both ends of that, you know, you're not going anywhere in this work. And it's that recognition and I get lost like everybody else. I mean, I get diverted into other things for job and family and survival and et cetera. And when I realize that, I know it's time to go back in and invest in these movements of people, these communities of people, neighborhoods of people, and, you know, whether they're in New Orleans or Louisiana or Port-au-Prince or wherever they are.
Bill, thank you for your time.
Thank you all. I enjoyed it.